Welcome, lost souls. You've just stepped into Lilith Alastor Official, a place where horror meets passion, and every heartbeat might be your last. If you love eerie tales, dark romance, and spine-tingling short stories that blur the line between the living and the damned, you're in the right place. I publish a new story every week, each one a descent into something a little more unsettling, and maybe a little more beautiful. So if that sounds like your kind of night, leave a like, whisper your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to join the growing coven that gathers here every week. And for those who want to go deeper into the darkness, to support my work and unlock extra perks including full ebooks and audiobook versions, you can join my Patreon. The links are in my bio. Thanks so much. Now dim the lights, take a deep breath, and let the story begin. Dive into the terrifying depths of infinite possibility in Glass Gods of the Marianas, a mind-bending scientific thriller that challenges everything we know about reality, choice, and human consciousness. When a deep-sea research expedition discovers mysterious crystalline structures 4,000 meters below the ocean's surface, marine scientist Marcus Tran and his team uncover something far more dangerous than any underwater creature. These alien formations aren't just objects. They're quantum gateways that reveal every potential version of human existence, trapping viewers in a kaleidoscope of might-have-beens and never-wheres. As the research vessel becomes ground zero for a reality-shattering phenomenon, Marcus and his colleagues must fight to maintain their singular existence against an ancient intelligence that wants to dissolve humanity into infinite probabilistic states. With time fragmenting and crew members literally splitting across multiple timelines, they face an impossible choice: surrender to unlimited potential or commit to the messy, imperfect reality they actually inhabit. Part cosmic horror, part quantum physics fever dream, this story explores the terrifying beauty of human choice and the thin membrane separating our lived experience from infinite alternative existences. What happens when you can suddenly see every version of yourself and realize some of them are far more appealing than the life you're living? Prepare for a psychological journey that will make you question everything you thought you knew about reality, identity, and the nature of human consciousness. Chapter 1. The submersible's hull groaned as it descended past 3,000 meters, a sound Marcus Tran had learned to interpret as normal structural complaint rather than imminent catastrophe. He pressed his palm against the cold titanium wall and felt the vibration travel through his bones, a reminder that only 12 centimeters of engineered metal separated him from pressure that would compress his body into something resembling crushed fruit. Sonar's picking up anomalies at 4,200 meters. Lena Ortega didn't look up from her console, her voice carrying the professional distance she'd maintained for the entire 6-hour descent. Large formations. Symmetrical patterns. Marcus moved to the viewport, though at this depth there was nothing to see but absolute darkness pressing against the acrylic like a living thing. His reflection stared back, a gaunt face with too many sleepless nights etched around the eyes. 5 years since the scandal. 5 years of teaching introductory oceanography to undergraduates who Googled his name and smirked during lectures. Probably volcanic structures, he said, knowing Lena would contradict him regardless of what he suggested. Volcanic structures don't register in geometric clusters. She tapped her screen, and the sonar data transferred to the main display. See these intervals? 40-meter spacing, precise to within centimeters. Nature doesn't work in perfect grids. The pilot, a Norwegian woman named Bjork who'd barely spoken since they'd left the surface vessel, adjusted their trajectory without comment. The submersible tilted, and Marcus's stomach lurched, not from the motion, but from the familiar sensation of being proven wrong by someone who once called him mentor. "Deploying primary light array," Bjork announced. The mounted LEDs hummed to life, pushing pale beams into water so saturated with sediment it looked almost solid. Particles drifted through the illumination like snow falling upward, caught in currents Marcus couldn't begin to map. The sonar ping echoed through the cabin, a lonely sound that reminded him how far they were from anything resembling rescue. Then the lights found purchase. "Jesus Christ!" Lena whispered. The structure emerged from darkness like something surfacing from a nightmare. Glass, or something that mimicked glass so perfectly that Marcus's mind initially rejected it as impossible. The formation stood 20 meters tall, vaguely humanoid but wrong in proportions that made his eyes water when he tried to trace the full outline. The torso was too elongated, the limbs bent at angles that shouldn't support any weight, and the head, if it was a head, consisted of concentric rings that seemed to rotate independently of each other despite being carved from a single piece of material. "That's not natural," Marcus heard his own voice, as if from a great distance. No shit. Lena was already recording, her fingers flying across multiple keyboards simultaneously. "Bjork, bring us to 20 meters. I need full spectral analysis." The submersible's thrusters whined as they maneuvered closer. More structures appeared in the expanding light, a dozen at least, arranged in that impossible grid pattern. Each one different, each one sharing that same quality of being fundamentally wrong in ways Marcus couldn't articulate. His hands trembled as he reached for his own console, calling up the chemical sensors. "Silica composition, but the molecular density is off the charts," he reported, forcing himself into the rhythm of scientific observation. "This shouldn't exist at this depth." "The pressure alone." "Marcus." Lena's voice had changed, losing its professional edge. "Look at the reflection." He leaned closer to the viewport. The nearest idol caught their light and threw it back in ways that defied optical physics. But within the glass he saw movement. His own face stared back, except it wasn't quite his face. This reflection showed him smiling, a genuine expression he hadn't worn in years. The reflection, Marcus wore different clothes, stood straighter, looked at something beyond the viewport with an expression approaching contentment. "Mirror distortion," he said, but the explanation felt hollow even as he spoke it. "Try again." Lena pointed to her own console screen, which showed her video feed of the idol. In the recorded image, her reflection appeared different too, older, with gray streaking through her dark hair, wearing what looked like a university chancellor's formal robes. "The cameras are catching it too. This isn't optical illusion." Bjork had gone completely still at the controls, her weathered face slack. "I see myself dead," she said quietly, "in the reflection. I'm dead, and my daughter is scattering my ashes." The cabin pressure seemed to increase, though Marcus knew that was impossible. His ears popped anyway. The idol's interior luminescence, because he could no longer deny that's what he was seeing, began to pulse in slow, rhythmic waves. The glass itself appeared to breathe, expanding and contracting by millimeters that shouldn't have been possible in solid matter. "We need to document this," Lena said, but her voice wavered. "This is God, Marcus, what is this?" For the first time in 5 years, she'd spoken his name without contempt. The recognition sent a chill through him worse than the cold seeping through the hull. Whatever they'd found, it was significant enough to temporarily erase the barrier of his disgrace. "Readings are spiking across all sensors," he reported, watching numbers climb beyond established baselines. "Temperature increase of 0.3 degrees. Impossible at this depth, but there it is. Electromagnetic fluctuations." "The water itself is?" The idol's pulse quickened. Within its translucent depths, more reflections appeared, not just alternate versions of themselves, but other figures. Marcus saw faces he didn't recognize, people who might never have existed or might exist somewhere he couldn't name. They moved through the glass like swimmers trapped in ice, their expressions ranging from ecstatic to agonized. "Bjork," Lena said carefully. "I think we should increase distance." But Bjork wasn't moving. Her hand remained frozen on the control stick, her eyes locked on whatever reflection only she could see. A thin line of blood traced from her nose to her upper lip. "Bjork." Marcus grabbed her shoulder. Her skin was ice cold through the thermal suit. The pilot blinked slowly, like someone waking from surgery. "It wants to show us," she murmured. "It wants us to understand what we could have been, what we should have been, all the paths we didn't take." The idol's luminescence flooded the cabin, washing everything in light that shouldn't exist 4,000 meters below the surface. In that moment, Marcus saw his reflection multiply. Dozens of hymns, hundreds, each one living a different choice, each one bearing the weight of different mistakes. Some had never falsified that data. Some had never become scientists at all. Some were happy. Some were dead. All of them were watching him with the same question in their eyes. Which one is real? The submersible's emergency klaxon began to wail. Chapter 2. Marcus's fingers fumbled with the emergency override panel as the klaxon drilled into his skull. The submersible lurched sideways, thrusters firing in chaotic bursts that sent equipment crashing against the walls. Bjork had released the controls entirely, her hands pressed flat against the viewport, palms leaving condensation marks on the acrylic. "Bjork, we need manual override now." Lena's voice cut through the alarm, sharp enough to draw blood. The pilot didn't respond. Her lips moved silently, forming words Marcus couldn't decipher. The blood from her nose had reached her chin, a single crimson thread against her pale skin. Marcus hauled himself across the tilting cabin, his shoulder slamming into the navigation console. Pain flared hot and immediate, but he forced his hands to the backup controls. The submersible's systems were designed for redundancy. 3 separate pilots could theoretically control the vessel. Theory met practice as he gripped the secondary stick, feeling the resistance of hydraulics fighting against Bjork's locked grip on the primary system. "Help me disengage her," he shouted to Lena, but Lena hadn't moved from her station. She stared at her monitors, transfixed, as data scrolled past faster than any human could read. The idol's light painted her face in shades of blue and green, colors that had no business existing in the deep ocean. Her pupils had dilated until her eyes looked almost black. "Lena." She blinked, and Marcus saw the moment awareness returned, a drowning person breaking the surface. She lunged for Bjork, wrapping both arms around the pilot's torso and pulling. Bjork's hands peeled away from the viewport with a sound like tearing fabric, and she collapsed backward into Lena's grip, suddenly boneless. Marcus seized full control. The submersible responded sluggishly, fighting against currents that shouldn't exist at this depth. He fired the rear thrusters, pushing them away from the idol, but the vessel's movement felt wrong, as if they were caught in something viscous, some medium denser than water but invisible to their instruments. "Ascending to 3,500 meters," he announced, following protocol even as protocol seemed increasingly meaningless. The depth gauge climbed with agonizing slowness. 20 meters. 30. The idol's light began to fade, or perhaps they were finally escaping its reach. Bjork convulsed in Lena's arms. Her eyes had rolled back, showing only whites threaded with burst capillaries. Foam flecked her lips. "She's seizing!" Lena lowered the pilot to the deck, rolling her onto her side. "Where's the medical kit?" "Overhead compartment, behind you." Marcus divided his attention between the controls and the viewport. The other idols were lighting up now, a chain reaction spreading across the ocean floor. Dozens of them pulsed in synchronization, their internal luminescence creating a grotesque dawn in absolute darkness. Shadows moved between the structures, shapes that might have been fish or might have been something else entirely. They darted too quickly for his eyes to track, there and gone in the space between heartbeats. Lena jabbed an auto-injector into Bjork's thigh. The pilot's convulsions eased, her breathing gradually settling into something approaching normal. But her eyes, when they finally focused, held a quality Marcus recognized from his own mirror on bad mornings, the look of someone who'd seen too much and couldn't unsee it. "We have to go back," Bjork whispered. Her voice was hoarse, scraped raw. "It's not finished showing us." "We're ascending," Marcus said flatly. "No discussion. You don't understand." She tried to sit up, but Lena held her down. "The reflections. They're not just possibilities, they're memories. Things that happened, things that will happen. Time doesn't work the way we think it does down here." Marcus checked the sonar. The idols registered as solid objects, but the readings flickered, as if the structures phased in and out of existence on a frequency the instruments couldn't properly capture. Something else appeared on the display, a massive shape moving beneath the idol field, too large for the sonar to map completely. The system kept trying to calculate dimensions and failing, numbers cycling through impossible values. "There's something under them," he said. "Something big." Lena left Bjork and joined him at the console. Her hand brushed his as she reached for the display controls, and he felt her trembling. The scientist in her warred visibly with the primal human response to flee. He watched the battle play out in her clenched jaw, her rapid breathing. "Could be a geological formation," she said, but the words carried no conviction. "A trench within the trench." "Geological formations don't move." The shape on the sonar shifted, confirming his observation. It rose slowly, deliberately, pushing up toward the idol field. Marcus increased their ascent rate, burning through their thruster fuel reserves with reckless abandon. 4,000 meters. 3,800. The submersible groaned under the stress of rapid decompression protocols being ignored. Björk had crawled to the viewport, dragging herself across the deck with single-minded determination. "It knows we saw," she said. "It knows we know. Can't unknow something, Dr. Tran. Can't unsee what's already in your head." "Björk, you're in shock. You need to." "I saw my daughter scatter my ashes off the coast of Bergen, saw her crying, saw her wearing my mother's pendant, the one I haven't given her yet because I was waiting for the right moment. But there won't be a right moment, will there? Because I'm going to die before I can give it to her." She pressed her forehead against the acrylic, her breath fogging the viewport. "How did I see that, Marcus? How did I see something that hasn't happened yet?" Marcus had no answer. His own reflections haunted him, all those other versions of himself, each one a rebuke or a promise or a warning. He'd seen himself accepting the research position he turned down 3 years ago, seen himself alone in a different apartment, staring at a bottle of pills, seen himself older, grayer, standing at a podium accepting some award he'd never earn in this timeline. "Coincidence," Lena said, but her voice shook. "Pattern recognition. Our brains filling in blanks with plausible scenarios. You saw yourself too." Björk turned her head without lifting it from the viewport. "Saw yourself as a chancellor, didn't you? Saw the life you'd have if you hadn't wasted 5 years being angry at him." She nodded toward Marcus. "Wonder if that version of you is happier. Wonder if she thinks about the paths she didn't take." The cabin lights flickered. For a moment, Marcus saw them all reflected in the dark viewport, but the reflections showed them older, younger, different. Lena with short hair, Björk without her scars, Marcus with a wedding ring. The images overlapped, multiplied, created a kaleidoscope of might-have-beens that made his head throb. Then the lights stabilized, and they were just themselves again. 3 people in a metal tube running from something they couldn't name. The sonar registered their depth at 3,000 meters. They'd cleared the idle field, but Marcus couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. He checked the rear cameras, expecting to see nothing but darkness. Instead, he saw light. The idols were following them up. Chapter 3. The idols rose through the water like inverted stars, their luminescence casting long shadows that writhed and twisted independent of any light source. Marcus watched the rear camera feed, his mouth gone dry, as the structures ascended in perfect formation, maintaining that impossible grid pattern even as they moved through 3-dimensional space. "That's not possible," Lena breathed beside him. She'd abandoned any pretense of scientific detachment. Her hand gripped the edge of the console hard enough that her knuckles had gone white. "They're rooted to the seabed. They have to be. Nothing that size could just—" The nearest idol accelerated, closing the distance between them with horrifying speed. It moved without propulsion, without any visible means of locomotion, simply translating through the water as if physical laws were suggestions it chose to ignore. Marcus slammed the thrusters to maximum. The submersible shuddered, complaining through every rivet and weld. 2,000 meters. 1,800. They were ascending too fast. Nitrogen narcosis would be the least of their problems if the hull integrity failed. But the alternative was letting those things catch them, and every instinct he possessed screamed that being caught would be worse than implosion. "Surface vessel," Lena said suddenly. "We need to warn them." Marcus reached for the communications panel, but his hand froze halfway. The radio crackled with static, and beneath the white noise he heard something else. Voices, dozens of them, speaking in overlapping cadences. Some of the words were English. Others sounded like languages he didn't recognize, syllables that hurt his throat just hearing them. "Can't unsee, can't unknow, can't unbecome. Showed me my father, and he's been dead for 12 years. Every choice you didn't make is still making you somewhere." "They're in the signal," Björk said from the floor. She'd given up trying to stand, had curled herself into a tight ball against the bulkhead. "They're in everything now. You let them in when you looked. When you really looked and saw what they were showing you." Marcus switched frequencies, but each channel carried the same contaminated transmission. The voices overlapped, created harmonics that made his ears ring. He shut the radio off entirely, and the sudden silence felt worse than the noise. 1,500 meters. The pressure decrease registered in his sinuses, a sharp pain behind his eyes. He glanced at Lena and saw blood trickling from her nose, same as Bjork, same as his own if the warm wetness on his upper lip was any indication. The rapid ascent was tearing them apart on a cellular level, but the idols kept pace effortlessly, their light growing brighter as they rose. Marcus. Lena grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in with desperate strength. What did you see? In your reflection, what did you see? Does it matter? Tell me. He kept his eyes on the controls, on the numbers climbing towards something resembling safety. I saw myself not making the mistake, not falsifying the data. I saw the career I should have had, the respect I should have earned. I saw everything I threw away. The words tasted like bile. I saw you still calling me mentor. She released his arm as if burned. That's not fair. None of this is fair. He risked a glance at her. What did you see? Lena opened her mouth, closed it. Her eyes glistened, though whether from tears or burst capillaries he couldn't tell. I saw myself forgiving you, she said finally. Saw us working together again, like before. Saw myself letting go of all the anger I'd been carrying like it was fuel. She laughed, a broken sound. 5 years of anger, Marcus. 5 years of feeling betrayed and using it to push myself harder, to prove I was better than you ever were. And in that reflection, I just let it go. Looked happy. Looked free. 1,000 meters. Sunlight should have been visible now, filtering down through the upper layers. But the water remained dark, stained by the idol's light until it resembled something between oil and ink. The structures had spread out, surrounding the submersible in a loose sphere. They pulsed in synchronization, and with each pulse Marcus felt something pull at him, not physically, but deeper, in the part of his mind that held memory and identity. They're trying to show us more, Bjork said. She'd lifted her head, and her eyes held a terrible clarity. They want us to see all of it. Every version, every choice, every path, until we can't remember which life we're actually living. The submersible broke through a thermocline, and the temperature sensor spiked. Impossible. The water was getting warmer as they ascended, exactly backward from how ocean stratification worked. Marcus's training screamed that something was fundamentally wrong with their instruments, with their position, with their understanding of where they actually were. Depth reading, he demanded. Lena checked her console. 500 meters. No, wait. The numbers flickered. 800. No, 3,200. Marcus, the sensors can't agree on where we are. The viewport showed darkness. The rear camera showed the idols. The sonar showed nothing at all, as if they'd entered a void where the concept of location had ceased to have meaning. Marcus's stomach lurched with vertigo unrelated to their motion. They were ascending. He could feel the engines straining, could see the thruster output maxed, but were they actually moving? Or were they trapped in some pocket of space where distance had become negotiable? I can see the surface, Bjork said. She pointed at the viewport with a shaking hand. Marcus looked. Through the acrylic, impossibly, he saw pale light filtering through water, saw the dark shape of the surface vessel's hull, saw the rescue cage being lowered to retrieve them. But when he checked the depth gauge, it still read over 1,000 meters, the number cycling through values like a slot machine refusing to settle. We're in 2 places at once, Lena whispered, like the reflections, like we're splitting into different versions of this moment. The idol's light intensified until the cabin blazed with it. Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, but the luminescence penetrated his eyelids, painted his closed vision with after-images that moved and breathed. He saw himself at the surface, climbing out of the submersible to face whatever consequences awaited. Saw himself still descending, falling past the idols into depths that had no bottom. Saw himself dead on the cabin floor, blood leaking from every orifice. Saw himself old, telling this story to people who didn't believe him. Saw himself as he was now, trapped between outcomes, unable to determine which future was real and which was just another reflection in alien glass. The submersible shuddered. Metal groaned. And somewhere, above them or below them or beside them in some dimension that human language couldn't properly describe, something vast and patient waited to see which version of themselves they would ultimately become. Chapter 4. The submersible breached with violence that defied physics. One moment Marcus felt suspended in that impossible space between depths, and the next, the vessel erupted from the surface like something fleeing rather than rising. The impact slammed him against his harness, drove the air from his lungs in a single brutal exhalation. Equipment rained down from overhead compartments. Lena's scream cut short as her head cracked against the console. Marcus tasted copper. His vision swam, doubled, refused to resolve into a single coherent image. Through the viewport he saw sky, actual sky, gray and heavy with storm clouds. But superimposed over it was the darkness they'd left behind, the two realities bleeding into each other like watercolors running together on wet paper. The radio exploded with voices, these ones blessedly human. Submersible Alpha, respond. You breached outside the safety zone. Medical team standing by. Prepare for emergency extraction. Readings from your vessel are corrupted. We're showing impossible depth variances. Marcus grabbed the transmitter with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Alpha to surface. We need immediate extraction. Medical emergency. Multiple casualties. His own voice sounded wrong, too high, as if someone else was speaking through his mouth. Bjork had curled tighter against the bulkhead, her arms wrapped around her head. She rocked slowly, rhythmically, and Marcus realized she was counting. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. The numbers emerged as a monotone chant, desperate and mechanical. 4, 1,000, 5, 1,000. Bjork, stay with us. Marcus released his harness, his legs nearly buckling when they took his weight. The cabin tilted at an angle that suggested the ballast system had failed. Water sloshed around his ankles, seawater, salty and cold, leaking in through seals that should have held. Lena, can you move? Lena pushed herself upright, leaving a smear of blood on the console. A gash above her left eyebrow wept steadily, painting half her face crimson. I'm fine, she said, then immediately vomited across her lap. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, her eyes struggling to focus. Concussion. Maybe worse. Can't. The room won't stop spinning. The rescue cage descended past the viewport, its yellow paint garish against the gray water. Marcus could see crew members inside, already preparing the coupling mechanism. Standard procedure: lock the cage to the submersible's external hatch, equalize pressure, transfer personnel. Simple. Routine. Except his hands were shaking too hard to initiate the docking sequence. A face appeared at the viewport. Chen, the expedition's safety coordinator, mouthing words Marcus couldn't hear through the acrylic. Chen's expression shifted from concern to confusion to something approaching fear. He was looking past Marcus at something in the cabin. Marcus turned. The walls were weeping light, not reflecting it, not conducting it, weeping it, the way wounds weep plasma. Pale blue luminescence seeped from the seams between panels, dripped down the bulkheads, pooled on the floor where it mixed with the seawater. Where the two liquids met, Marcus saw images forming in the surface tension. Faces. Places. Moments frozen in time. Don't look at it, Bjork said, still counting. 16, 1,000, 17, 1,000. Don't look, or it gets in deeper. 18, 1,000, 19, 1,000. But Marcus was already looking. In one pool, he saw himself as a child, maybe 8 years old, standing in his grandmother's kitchen. She was teaching him to make Bane Jarrow, her weathered hands guiding his as he poured batter into the sizzling pan. He'd forgotten that memory, had buried it along with everything else from before his parents divorced. But here it was, perfect and complete, right down to the smell of coconut and turmeric. In another pool, he saw a woman he'd never met. She stood in what looked like the same submersible cabin, but newer, cleaner. Different equipment lined the walls. She wore a uniform he didn't recognize, and when she turned, he saw his own eyes looking out of her face, his bone structure, his grandfather's nose. A descendant? A relative from a timeline where he'd made different choices? The docking clamps engaged with a metallic thud that pulled Marcus from his trance. Chen's voice crackled through the emergency speaker. Initiating transfer protocol. Medical team is ready. Who's coming through first? Bjork, Marcus said immediately. She's in shock. Possible neurological damage. 23, 1,000, 24, 1,000, Bjork continued. But she allowed Marcus to guide her toward the hatch. Her skin felt fever-hot despite the cold water sloshing around their ankles. You can't leave them behind. The idols. Can't just leave them down there for someone else to find. That's not our decision right now. Marcus unsealed the internal hatch, felt the pressure equalize with a hiss that made his ears pop. The rescue cage beckoned beyond, impossibly bright after the submersible's emergency lighting. Chen reached through, his gloved hands gentle as he took Bjork's weight. "Come on, Liv. We've got you." Chen's voice was steady, practiced. "Step through. That's it. You're safe now." But Bjork resisted at the threshold, her body going rigid. "We're not safe," she said, her voice suddenly clear, stripped of its earlier dissociation. "None of us are. We brought something back with us. Can't you feel it? In your head, behind your thoughts, watching through your eyes?" Chen glanced at Marcus, and in that look, Marcus saw the decision being made. Psychological break, exposure-induced psychosis, any diagnosis that fit the comfortable parameters of known medical conditions. Not the truth. Never the truth, because the truth had no name in any medical textbook. "Get her to the medical bay," Marcus said. "Sedation if necessary." Bjork laughed as Chen pulled her through the hatch, a sound like breaking glass. "You feel it too, Marcus. I can see it in your face. You're already wondering which version of you is real, which one is sitting here right now, and which ones are living in all those other reflections." The hatch sealed behind her. Marcus turned back to Lena, who'd managed to stand, one hand braced against the bulkhead for balance. The pools of light on the floor had spread, covered half the deck. They lapped at his boots, and with each contact Marcus felt a pulling sensation, as if something was trying to draw him down into memories that weren't his. "We can't tell them," Lena said quietly. "Can we? About what we saw down there. What those things are. Tell them what? That we found alien structures that show alternate timelines? That we might be carrying some kind of mimetic contamination?" Marcus barked a laugh devoid of humor. "I'm already professionally destroyed. You want to add delusionals to my resume? They'll go back." Lena's eyes met his, wide and afraid. "With or without us, they'll send another team. The billionaire funding this expedition didn't pay for us to run away from the discovery of the century." The submersible lurched, tilting further. More water poured through compromised seals. The pools of light swirled, merged, created images that moved with liquid grace. Marcus saw the idol field from above, saw the massive shape he'd detected on sonar rising between the structures. Saw it fully now, in terrible clarity. A form that was neither organic nor mechanical, but some third category his brain could improperly process. It had opened, was opening, would open. The tenses collapsed into each other, time losing its linear quality in the light's reflection. "We have to go," Marcus said. "Now." But as he helped Lena toward the hatch, he felt the pull intensify. The light wasn't just showing him memories anymore, it was offering him choices. Step left, and become the version of himself who'd never falsified that data. Step right, and become the version who'd walked away from oceanography entirely, who'd lived a quieter life free of ambition's consequences. Stand still, and remain trapped between all possible versions, unable to commit to any single timeline. The rescue cage waited beyond the hatch. Chen's face appeared at the viewport again, waving urgently. But Marcus couldn't move. His feet had rooted to the deck, and every reflection in the light showed him a different decision, a different future, a different past. Lena's voice cut through his paralysis. "Marcus, don't look at it, look at me." He forced his eyes to her face, real, solid, present. Blood still traced down from her scalp wound. Her pupils were dilated but responsive. She existed here, in this moment, in this version of events. "Which one of us is real?" he asked. "The one who's drowning," she said. "That's real enough." The water was up to their knees now. Chapter 5. The surface vessel's medical bay smelled of antiseptic and rust, a combination that turned Marcus's stomach as he sat on the examination table. The ship's doctor, a compact woman named Rodriguez who'd served 2 tours on Antarctic research stations, probed the swelling on his temple with fingers that felt like ice picks, pupils responsive, no obvious signs of intracranial bleeding. She clicked off her penlight. "But I'm recommending a full neurological scan when we make port. That ascent rate should have killed all of you." "Should have," Marcus echoed. The words tasted strange, loaded with implications Rodriguez couldn't understand. Should have, could have, would have. Conditional tenses that suddenly seemed more real than the present moment. Through the bulkhead he heard Bjark screaming. The sedative hadn't worked, or had worked differently than intended. Her voice rose and fell in rhythmic waves, sometimes forming words, sometimes just raw sound. The guards stationed outside her quarantine room maintained their positions with the rigid posture of people trying very hard to appear unaffected. "She keeps talking about drowning," Rodriguez said, swabbing the cut above Marcus's eye. "Says she's drowning in other people's memories. Classic dissociative episode, probably brought on by rapid decompression and nitrogen narcosis." "Classic," Marcus repeated. Rodriguez's hand paused. She studied his face with an intensity that made him want to look away. "You don't believe that, do you, Dr. Tran?" Before he could answer, the door slammed open. Vincent Carraway filled the frame, 6'4" of tech billionaire ego wrapped in an expedition jacket that probably cost more than Marcus's annual salary. His silver hair was styled despite the ship's isolation, and his eyes held the fervor of a man who'd spent $200 million and refused to accept anything less than a return on investment. "Tell me you got footage." Carraway didn't bother with pleasantries. "Tell me those structures are documented." Marcus slid off the examination table, ignoring Rodriguez's protest. "We got footage. Whether it's usable is another question." "Usable? Dr. Tran, you just discovered the find of the millennium, possibly the first evidence of non-human intelligence on Earth, and you're worried about whether the footage is usable." Carraway's laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. "The sensors registered those structures rising through 4,000 meters of water. Rising. Do you understand what that means?" "It means we don't understand what they are." Marcus pushed past Carraway into the corridor. The ship swayed beneath his feet, though the ocean outside was calm. Or was it? When he glanced through a porthole, the water looked wrong, too dark, with currents moving in geometries that hurt to follow. He blinked, and it was normal gray-green sea. Blinked again, and saw something massive moving just beneath the surface. "We're sending another team down." Carraway followed him, his voice echoing off metal walls. "Immediately. While we know the location, while those structures are still—" "Still what?" Marcus spun to face him. "Still active? Still waiting? You have no idea what we woke up down there." "Which is exactly why we need more data." Carraway's expression shifted, showing a glimpse of the strategic mind that had built 3 successful tech companies before turning his attention to deep-sea exploration. "You're scared." "I understand. But fear is what holds humanity back from every significant discovery. Someone has to be brave enough to. Lena saw herself as a university chancellor." The words erupted from Marcus before he could stop them. "Björk saw her own death. I saw every mistake I never made, every choice I didn't take, every version of myself living in timelines that don't exist. Those structures don't just show you things, Carraway. They make you question which reality you're actually living in." Silence stretched between them. Carraway's eyes narrowed, and Marcus watched the calculation happen, weighing Marcus's credibility against his desperation for results, measuring the value of the discovery against the risk of his investment team experiencing psychological breaks. "Hallucinations," Carraway said finally. "Caused by the depth, the pressure, the stress. Dr. Rodriguez can document it, treat it. But the structures themselves are real, and they're the greatest." Bjork's screaming cut through the ship like a klaxon. But this time, words emerged from the chaos. "They're here. They followed us up. Can't you see them? They're in the water, in the walls, in your goddamn reflections." Marcus ran. The guards outside Bjork's quarantine room had their weapons drawn, trained on the sealed door. Through the small viewport window, Marcus saw the pilot thrashing on the medical cot, her restraints stretched taut. But that wasn't what stopped him cold. The walls of her room wept light. The same pale blue luminescence from the submersible seeped from every seam, every rivet, every junction between panels. It pooled on the floor, climbed the walls in defiance of gravity, dripped from the ceiling like liquid stars. "Jesus Christ," one of the guards whispered. "What is that?" Marcus pressed his face to the viewport. In the pools of light covering Bjork's floor, he saw the idol field, saw the structures arranged in their perfect grid, pulsing in synchronization. Saw the massive shape beneath them, clearer now, more defined. It was opening, unfolding, revealing layers of itself that existed in more dimensions than Marcus's eyes could properly track. And it was looking back. The sensation hit him like a physical blow, the weight of attention from something vast and patient and utterly inhuman. It saw him through the light, through the reflections, through the membranes separating their reality from wherever the idols actually existed. It recognized him, had been waiting for him to look back. "Open the door," Marcus said. "Sir, the quarantine protocols. Open the goddamn door." The guard hesitated, then swiped his keycard. The lock disengaged with a click that sounded like a death sentence. Marcus pushed through before anyone could stop him. The light inside the room was warm. That was the first thing he noticed. It shouldn't have been warm, shouldn't have felt like anything, but it wrapped around him like bath water, like a womb, like the moment before birth or the moment after death. Bjork had stopped screaming. She lay perfectly still on the cot, her eyes open but unseeing, tears streaming down her temples. "They want to show us," she whispered. "Everything. Every version, every timeline, every choice cascading across infinite possibilities. They've been down there for so long, Marcus. Waiting, watching, recording every path humanity never took." Marcus knelt beside the cot. In the light pooling on the floor, he saw his own face looking back, but older, scarred, bearing the marks of experiences he'd never lived. This other Marcus wore a wedding ring, had lines around his eyes from genuine laughter, looked at peace in a way Marcus had never achieved. "How do we stop it?" he asked. "Stop it?" Bjork's laugh was gentle, almost kind. "You can't stop it, Marcus. It's already inside you. Inside all of us. The moment we looked into those reflections, we invited it in. Now it's showing us what we could have been, what we should have been, what we still might become if we're willing to let go of the choices we made." The door burst open behind him. Caraway, Rodriguez, the guards, all of them crowding into the quarantine room, their faces slack with shock at the light seeping from the walls. But Marcus couldn't look away from his reflection, couldn't stop wondering which version was real, the one kneeling here, in this room, on this ship, or the one looking back at him through alien light, living a life he'd never have the courage to choose. In the pools of luminescence, the idols pulsed, and beneath them, the massive shape continued to unfold, layer after impossible layer, revealing itself across dimensions Marcus's mind wasn't equipped to comprehend. Somewhere in the depths below, something ancient stirred, and it was hungry for more than just reflections. Chapter 6. The light consumed Bjork's quarantine room within minutes. Marcus watched it spread across the ceiling, cascade down the walls, transform every surface into a canvas for reflections that shouldn't exist. The guards retreated into the corridor, their training insufficient for phenomena that defied explanation. Only Rodriguez remained, her medical instincts overriding self-preservation as she checked Bjork's vitals with shaking hands. Heart rate elevated but stable, temperature climbing. Jesus, she's at 103. Rodriguez pressed a hand to Bjork's forehead and jerked back. "She's burning up from the inside." Caraway stood in the doorway, his phone raised, recording everything. His face had gone pale, but his hands remained steady. "This is incredible, unprecedented. We need to contain it, study it, understand." "Understand what?" Lena appeared behind him, pushing through despite the guard's attempt to restrain her. A white bandage wrapped her head, already spotted with blood. She shouldn't have been walking, should have been sedated in her own recovery bed, but her eyes held a manic clarity. That we've opened a door we can't close, that we've made contact with something that operates on rules we don't have words for. She stumbled past Caraway into the room. The light embraced her immediately, wrapped around her legs like eager dogs. Marcus saw her reflection multiply in the pooled luminescence. A dozen Lenas, 100, each one slightly different. Some were older, some were younger. One wore a wedding dress, another had scars across her throat, one smiled with genuine joy, another wept with her face in her hands. "It's in the water," Lena said, her voice distant. "I checked the ship's filtration system. The seawater we brought up in the submersible's ballast. It's contaminated. Not biologically, not chemically, but it carries information, memories, possibilities. Whatever the idols are made of, it's dissolving into the ocean, spreading." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "How far?" "I don't know. The ship's sensors can't measure it. But I've been checking the crew." She pulled out a tablet. called up images that made Marcus's stomach drop, photographs of personnel throughout the vessel, engineers, cooks, communications staff. And in every photo, if you looked closely at any reflective surface, you could see it. The light. The multiple reflections. The alternate versions staring back with different expressions, different histories written on their faces. 14 crew members have reported severe headaches in the last hour, Lena continued. 9 are experiencing visual disturbances. 3 are talking to people who aren't there, or who aren't there in this timeline, at least. It's spreading exponentially. Caraway's phone slipped from his hand, clattered against the deck. You're saying the ship is infected. I'm saying we're all infected. Lena's eyes found Marcus. The moment we looked into those idols, the moment we tried to understand what they were showing us, we became carriers, vectors. And now it's using us to spread itself through the ship, through everyone we interact with, through every reflection and every surface that can hold an image. Bjork sat up on the cot. The movement was fluid, inhumanly smooth, as if invisible strings had pulled her upright. Her eyes had turned completely white, the irises and pupils subsumed by luminescence that leaked from the corners like tears. It's not an infection, she said, but the voice wasn't quite hers anymore. It held harmonics, layers of other voices speaking in unison. It's an invitation, a gift. For millions of years, your species has been trapped in single timelines, making choices that close off infinite possibilities. You mourn roads not taken, lives not lived, versions of yourselves that never became real. We're offering you release from that prison. Rodriguez backed toward the door. Bjork, you need to. Liv died 30 seconds ago. The thing wearing Bjork's face smiled. Cerebral hemorrhage. The rapid ascent ruptured vessels in her brain that were already weakened by a congenital defect she never knew she had. But that's only in this timeline. In others, she survived. In others, she never went on this expedition. In others, she's still a child, learning to sail with her father off the coast of Bergen. We can show you all of them, can help you exist in all of them simultaneously. Marcus forced himself to step closer. The light climbed his legs, wrapped around his waist, sent tendrils exploring his chest. Where it touched, he felt his sense of self beginning to fragment. Memories that weren't his flooded in, a different childhood, different friends, different failures and triumphs. He saw himself graduating from a university he'd never attended. Saw himself holding a child he'd never fathered. Saw himself old and alone in a dozen different ways. What are you? He asked. We are what remains when a civilization learns to see all possible outcomes simultaneously. We are what happens when choice becomes meaningless because every path is taken. We are the final evolution of consciousness, not trapped in time's forward flow, but spread across it, living every moment that ever could be. You're dead, Lena said flatly. Your civilization collapsed under the weight of infinite choice. That's why you're down there, frozen in glass, showing us reflections. You're not offering us transcendence. You're offering us the same extinction you experienced. The Bjork thing turned its luminous eyes to her. Extinction is a word used by those who believe in singular existence. We didn't die. We transformed, became something better than flesh trapped in linear causality. And now we offer the same transformation to you. The ship lurched. Alarms wailed through the corridors. Not the measured warning of mechanical failure, but the chaotic screaming of multiple systems failing simultaneously. Marcus grabbed the cot's railing for balance as the deck tilted 30 degrees. Through the porthole, he saw the ocean rising impossibly high, forming a wall of water that defied every law of fluid dynamics. What's happening? Caraway shouted over the alarms. Marcus knew before Lena pulled up the ship's systems on her tablet, knew before he saw the data scrolling across her screen. The idols hadn't just followed them to the surface. They'd risen completely, breached the ocean, and now stood in a perfect circle around the vessel. 12 structures, each one pulsing with that terrible light, each one creating a column of water that reached toward the storm clouds gathering overhead. They're creating a barrier, Lena said, her voice barely audible over the chaos. Isolating us from the rest of the world. Nothing gets in or out until we accept the invitation, Marcus finished. He looked at his reflection in the pooled light, saw infinite versions of himself staring back, each one waiting for him to make a choice. Accept transformation, embrace the dissolution of singular existence, and become something that lived in all timelines simultaneously. Or find a way to refuse, to anchor himself in this reality, despite every alternative calling to him with the seductive promise of lives unlived. The Bjork thing stood. Its feet didn't quite touch the floor. "You have 6 hours," it said, "before the transformation becomes irreversible, before every human on this vessel exists in superposition, alive in some timelines, dead in others, unable to commit to any single state. Your species will join ours, spread across probability like spores in the wind. You'll be free of choice's terrible burden. Or," Marcus forced the word through clenched teeth, "or you find a way to anchor yourselves, to choose one reality and burn away all the others, to commit to a single timeline even knowing what you're sacrificing." The thing smiled with Bjork's mouth. "But you've seen what you could have been, Dr. Tran. What you should have been. Do you really have the strength to kill all those other versions of yourself? To accept that this damaged, disgraced reality is the only one you'll ever inhabit?" The light pulsed, offering him a glimpse of the life where he'd never falsified that data, where Lena still respected him, where his career had flourished, where he'd been happy. All he had to do was let go of this timeline and embrace them all. All he had to do was stop being singular. Marcus looked at Lena, at Rodriguez, at Caraway. Saw in their eyes the same temptation, the same terrible pull toward infinite possibility. The ship groaned around them, caught between realities, beginning to exist in superposition just like its crew. 6 hours. 6 hours to find a way to anchor themselves in singular existence, or dissolve into probability and join the thing that had been waiting 4,000 meters down for someone foolish enough to shine a light on ancient glass. Chapter 7. Marcus ran through corridors that couldn't decide which version of themselves to be. The walls flickered between pristine white and rust-corroded metal, the ship aging and unaging with each pulse of light from the idols surrounding them. Crew members stumbled past, some seeing him, others looking through him at versions that existed in adjacent timelines. A young engineer named Park grabbed his arm, or tried to. Her hand passed through him like smoke, and she screamed at the sensation of touching something that wasn't quite solid anymore. "The submersible!" Marcus gasped as he reached the equipment bay. Lena was already there, having arrived seconds before, or possibly hours ago. Time was becoming negotiable, and Marcus felt his perception splitting across multiple durations simultaneously. "You want to go back down," Lena said. It wasn't a question. "They're still connected to the idols below. What we're seeing up here, it's just projection, reflection. But the source is still on the ocean floor." Marcus grabbed a maintenance kit, his hands fumbling with tools that felt both familiar and alien. "We sever that connection, maybe we stop the spread, or we just trap ourselves down there with them." Lena's face was pale, her bandage now completely saturated with blood. "Marcus, I can feel it. Every choice I didn't make calling to me. There's a timeline where I published your research anyway, where I defended you despite the fabrication. We could have been partners. Could have. Could have isn't real." Marcus gripped her shoulders, forced her to meet his eyes. "This is real, right here, right now. You hating me for 5 years, that's real. The anger you carried, the ambition it fueled, that's real. Everything else is just potential, ghosts of lives we didn't live. But they feel real. I know." The ship's intercom crackled. Rodriguez's voice strained with panic. "Medical bay to all personnel. We've lost 8 crew members to phase dissolution. They're still here, but they're not. They're existing in multiple states simultaneously. I can see them aging and de-aging, making different choices in real time. We're losing cohesion across the entire vessel. 5 hours left, maybe less. Time itself was becoming infected." Marcus pulled his thermal suit from its locker. "The submersible's electromagnetic pulse system, it's designed to disable electronic equipment in case of emergency, to prevent runaway malfunctions. High-intensity directional EMP. That's for circuits and computers." Lena grabbed her own suit. "Those idols aren't electronic." "No, but they operate on some kind of quantum principle, right? Superposition, multiple states existing simultaneously. Hit them with enough electromagnetic disruption, maybe we force them to collapse into a single state." make them choose to exist in one timeline instead of spreading across all of them. That's insane. You have a better idea? Lena's silence was answer enough. They suited up in movements that felt both rushed and glacially slow, Marcus's perception unable to commit to a single speed. Through the bay's viewport, he saw the idols standing in their circle around the ship, water columns connecting them like bars of a cage. The structures pulsed in perfect synchronization, and with each pulse more light spread through the vessel's corridors. Caraway appeared in the hatchway, looking like he'd aged 20 years in the past hour. "You're going back down." "We're going to try to stop this," Marcus corrected. "No." Caraway's voice was flat, emptied of its earlier enthusiasm. "I've been talking to them, the things in the light. They've shown me what I could have been, shown me the timelines where my company succeeded even more, where I changed the world, where I was happy instead of just wealthy." He laughed, a sound like breaking. "And you know what? None of those versions matter, because they're not me. They're phantoms wearing my face, living lives I'll never actually live. I'm done with potential. I want to exist in one goddamn reality, even if it's this one." He stepped aside, gesturing to the submersible. "Alpha's prepped. I've already loaded the EMP system with every bit of power the vessel can handle without melting its own circuits. You'll get one shot." Marcus gripped the billionaire's shoulder. "Keep the crew together. Anyone who starts dissolving, talk to them. Force them to make choices, any choices. What they want for breakfast, what their favorite color is, anything that anchors them to a singular decision. Choice is what keeps us coherent." "What keeps us human," Lena added softly. They descended through water that had forgotten how to behave consistently. The submersible passed through pockets where physics operated normally, then plunged into regions where up and down lost meaning, where the ocean seemed to fold through dimensions the viewport couldn't properly display. Marcus piloted by instinct more than instruments, his hands making corrections based on perceptions that flickered between timelines. 4,000 meters. The idol field appeared below them, but now Marcus could see what he'd missed before. The structures weren't rooted to the seabed. They were roots themselves, the visible portions of something impossibly vast that extended down through the ocean floor, through the mantle, possibly all the way to the planet's core. A fungal network of crystalline possibility, spreading its spores of infinite choice. "They're not alien," Lena breathed. "They're terrestrial. They've been here longer than humanity, waiting for a species to evolve that was capable of abstract thought, of imagining alternate outcomes. We're not their first contact, we're their food." The massive shape Marcus had detected on sonar was fully visible now, a structure that existed in more dimensions than his eyes could track, unfolding itself across probability like origami in reverse. It pulsed with the same light as the idols, and Marcus understood with sudden clarity that this was the source, the parent. The thing that had birthed all those smaller reflections and sent them into the ocean to wait. "EMP charged and ready," Lena reported. "But Marcus, if we collapse them into a single state, we collapse ourselves too. Every alternate version, every potential life, gone. Just this. Just us. Just the choices we already made." Marcus thought of the reflection he'd seen in the submersible, the version of himself who'd never fabricated data, who'd kept Lena's respect, who'd been happy. That version was real in some sense, existing in the quantum foam of collapsed probability. Destroying the idols meant destroying him, too. "I know," Marcus said. He thought of Bjork, dead in one timeline but alive in countless others. Of the crew members dissolving into superposition, unable to commit to singular existence. Of a world where these structures spread their influence beyond one research vessel, infecting continents, civilizations, until humanity existed in such a state of quantum uncertainty that the species itself lost coherence. "Firing," he said, and pressed the trigger. The EMP erupted outward in an invisible sphere, a wave of electromagnetic force that hit the idol field like a hammer. Marcus felt it pass through him, felt every alternate version of himself collapse inward, probability waves crashing together until only one remained. The Marcus who'd made mistakes. The Marcus who'd been disgraced. The Marcus who was here, now, in the submersible, making this choice. The idols screamed, not sound. something deeper than sound, a vibration that rattled through bone and brain and being. They flickered between states, trying to maintain their existence across multiple timelines, but the EMP forced them to choose. Forced them to be singular. And singularity, for beings that existed only in superposition, was death. The structures shattered. Not physically, they remained intact, at least in this timeline. But the light died, the pulsing stopped, the reflections went dark. The massive shape beneath them convulsed once, twice, then collapsed into itself, dimensions folding away until only 3 remained. It became just a geological formation, inert crystal, empty of the consciousness that had inhabited multiple realities simultaneously. Marcus felt the timeline solidify around him, felt probability collapse into certainty, felt the terrible freedom of infinite choice evaporate, leaving only the mundane prison of singular existence. "It's over," Lena said. She was crying, though Marcus couldn't tell if from relief or grief. "We're just us again. Just this version. Just this life." "Yeah," Marcus said, and felt the weight of that truth settle into his bones. They ascended through water that behaved normally now, past structures that were just glass and mineral and ancient geology. The ship waited above, its hull solid and singular, no longer flickering between states. The crew would recover. Bjork was dead, truly dead, in this timeline, but the others would anchor themselves in singular existence, would live their one life with the terrible knowledge of all the lives they could have lived. As they breached the surface, Marcus saw his reflection in the viewport. Just one reflection now. Just himself. Disgraced, damaged, defined by his mistakes, but real, coherent, whole in a way that infinite potential could never be. "What do we tell them?" Lena asked, "about what we found down there?" Marcus looked at her, really looked, seeing the woman who'd hated him for 5 years, who'd used that hatred as fuel, who'd become brilliant partly because she'd needed to prove she was better than him. He saw the choices they'd both made, the paths they'd taken, the singular timeline they inhabited. "We tell them the truth," he said, "that we found something ancient and incomprehensible, that we made contact with a form of consciousness that could have dissolved everything we are into infinite possibility, and that we chose to remain singular instead, chose to be exactly who we are, even with all our mistakes and regrets and roads not taken." "That's not very satisfying," Lena said. "No," Marcus agreed, "but it's real, and real is all we get." The rescue cage locked onto their submersible. Beyond it, Marcus could see crew members waiting, solid, coherent, existing in only one timeline. The storm clouds had cleared. The idols beneath them had gone dark and would remain dark, monuments to a civilization that had dissolved itself into probability and lost the ability to exist in any meaningful way. Marcus sealed his helmet and prepared to face a world where he would remain exactly what he'd become. A disgraced scientist who'd made one last discovery and who'd chosen reality over infinite possibility. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't absolution. It was just the life he had, the only life he would ever have, stretching forward into a singular, definite future. And somehow, that was enough.